Good.
Yeah, yeah. I just said and he's got a little bit of it's
Setting up. I'm just at the walkthrough. All right.
Thank you everybody for coming out today.
Thank you all for coming today, and thank you, Katrina. Thank you to Sandra and especially to Shannon for all of your help this week and for inviting me to show here. It's been a very challenging experience for a number of reasons, and one of the challenges I've kind of put on myself. So when I conceived of the show, I saw this as an opportunity to really start to integrate new works that are actually in response to my current phase of healing. And so I'm going to start off by sharing with you all the concept behind all of this work, which began with the pieces in this room and the sounds that you hear. So the titles of these larger photograms are under the banner a series called A Womb of My Own, and in parentheses, Mistakes Were Made in Development. And all of these works I consider underneath that umbrella because essentially the title really encompasses the sentiment behind the work, where I'm creating a space for myself, a space for recreation, a space for exploration, for confrontation, and for challenging and vulnerability. It's a very private, insular process, very internal, one where I ask myself a lot of questions that are tied to what it is that I need, what is it that I want, how am I doing? So I started making this work in response to, and you'll see in the exhibition statement, it's titled, it's phrased as like a, I would say familial trauma, where I was really questioning everything about myself and wanting to do something that was physically impossible, which was to start all over again, to just start from the very beginning, to be born again, to raise myself with the care that I am learning to give myself, but also understanding, and that's where the parenthetical mistakes from development comes in, the understanding that I'm not perfect, that even if I did this on my own, if I had this ideal situation, that there would still be some elements of just being a human, being someone who's unfurling, and not perfect at all. So making room for these mistakes and being open to them. So that's kind of like the psychological edge of it, but also in terms of the process as well. So all of that pretty much led me to making work very differently than how I made work before. So the older pieces began in 2014. And I would say that before then, I was a very strict darkroom printer. Love the darkroom, I love process, love chemistry. In a previous life, I was a scientist. I still am a little bit of a scientist. And so this chemical nature of photography is something that I found a lot of comfort in. Found a lot of comfort in order and the control. And I will say that once this familial upheaval happened, it forced me to reflect on that need for control and how that was serving me, and realizing that I needed a lot of control because I was essentially just used to dealing with chaos, and just essentially just adjusting to chaos. So when things got incredibly chaotic, that process no longer worked for me. I've been talking to Katrina and Sandra and Shannon and saying that to make photograms was a very photographic decision. So I'm a photographer, and I use photography to understand the world around me. I use photography to understand myself, to figure out things, and also to explore, as an artist, my proclivities towards things. Photography is something that I have really used, that has been very useful in understanding who I am. So I got to a point where I couldn't physically pick up a camera. I couldn't go through the process of developing the film. I could barely go outside. I could barely do anything outside or inside the process of photography that I was used to. So I decided, again, going back to these irrational things, what I wanted to do was just jam myself into a camera. I was like, I wish I could just scoot inside of a camera and then make a photo that way. Maybe I could just be inside the mechanisms. So the closest I could get is a photogram. So if anyone is unfamiliar, who's familiar with photograms? Are you guys all photo students? Just wondering. No? Okay, great. So I'll explain the photogram. I'll explain the process. So essentially, a photogram is a paper negative. It's a very rudimentary form of photography. You take a photosensitive or light-sensitive substrate, so a piece of paper, and these instances, they're darkroom paper, and you place an object on top of it, you expose it to light, and then you just go through the normal silver gelatin, black and white darkroom process of developing. So whatever the object was touching stays white, and then whatever was exposed to light is supposed to turn dark. So you have your highlights, the highest highlights, and then the darkest shadows. And so to make these, I essentially turned my living room into a camera and blacked out everything so that I could lay this paper down on the ground and use it as a surface to deal with, I'll say, like, to be very present with how I was feeling in my body. So all of these pieces actually in this exhibition are self-portraits, and some of them are like a more abstract sense of a self-portrait. But in this room, we also have these cyanotype pieces, and I make them laying down on top of them. I spend sometimes up to an hour or two just laying there, feeling the material, asking myself those questions: what do I need? What do I want? How do I feel? Where do I want to do next? Where do I want to go next? What does my body want to do? And in all of my works, I set up rules for myself to make sure that this encounter with these surfaces is therapeutic as possible. So again, going back to my very controlling days, with photograms, it's kind of hard to control what they will look like. And so I made a pact with myself to never come to the paper with an idea of what it's supposed to look like, to just be open to however I feel. When I'm ready, that's when I take the picture. So thinking about the camera, the whole entire room is the box, and the negative is the paper. The aperture is essentially the ceiling, because I just spray the whole room with light, and then I'm the shutter speed. So however quickly the strobes go off, like I'm the shutter. So what you're seeing is that moment where I'm ready to get up off of the paper. And so this only takes a millisecond, not very long. But in the darkroom is also where I spend time with them. So in this room, I made the decision to put very early works and then later works so that you could see the progression of the process. So behind on this wall, on the left-hand side is number 1, and then on the other side, on the right-hand side is number 3. And then if you turn to this wall here, these are later works that they're still in grid form, but they look a little different because I've approached them a little bit differently. This is number 7. This is number 9. We have number 12 here and number 10, and they all have numbers. There's only one piece that doesn't have a number, and if it were here, I'd explain it, but I'm not going to, so I'm going on a tangent. But as you can see, the texture of the paper is a lot more irregular. There is quite a bit of texture on in terms of the range of colors you get. So essentially these pieces I started to hand apply the developer and hand apply the fix and the stop. And I'm going to credit, oh my gosh, what's her name? Oh my gosh, Sugiura. Oh my gosh, I always talk about this artist. Her last name is Sugiura, who is a Japanese artist who's now based in New York City. But she's someone who also works in photograms, and I saw her lecture, and she talked about these beautiful pieces that I'd never seen before. That was basically her just splashing around developer without thinking about the chemistry and not thinking about, you know, timing or anything like that. And I never considered that you could have that kind of freedom in the darkroom. I'm not as far as she is. Like, I still am very particular about concentration. It's very important to me. I haven't let that go, and I don't think I ever will. But her sense of exploration and kind of shirking of the rules in the darkroom gave me permission to think through, like, why do I need to develop these images the way they're developed? I'm not necessarily saying that's good or bad, but just asking myself, like, what do you want? What do you need? And the idea of relinquishing control here also kind of coincides with where I am in my life, relinquishing control and being open to, I would say, the healing process, learning more about myself, contending with the aftermath of growing up in a very chaotic household, dealing with I would say the hardships of healing, and that kind of goes into the trajectory of the show. I've learned a lot, and I'll use the photograms as an example of this documentation of a change. I used to use the word progression, but I'm not going to use the word progression. I'm just going to say change, because progression implies a linearness, and this is not a linear experience that I'm going through, and it definitely just is one that continues to develop. And so this is kind of like a room that kind of documents that, but I in no way want you guys to think of it as a linear deal. That's also why I've included newer pieces in this room as well. So if you walk through the whole entire show, you'll see more of these cyanotype works in the middle room. And I focused on the middle room focused the cyanotypes in the middle room because I thought of it as like this area is sort of, think of it as like the womb area of it. This middle part is more like, they call it like a birthing canal. And then the outside part, or the very last gallery, is a space that was all instinct. So I built those images on the wall, and essentially tried to stay as instinctual and improvisational and putting up that works. But you also notice that there are instances of swoops and there are some light drawings on the wall. I had to doodle back there to install that, and doodling is also this kind of unconscious, subconscious thing that I think is it's important, period, but in my process it's also important to kind of, again, relinquish control. It also is how I make my cyanotype pieces. So the cyanotypes here and in that room there are also portraits. And if anyone is familiar with cyanotype process, it is a UV light sensitive photo process. So all these cyanotypes are photographs. They're self-portraits. I'm laying on top of them. They take a little bit longer to develop, so some of them take up to 40 minutes. So that requires me to lie still. And I use the sun as my UV source. And that is also part of the process where the sun, vitamin D, I just feel better if I make these outside. Sometimes I fall asleep because it's 40 minutes. And so I will sometimes take a nap. But it also is something about forcing me to stay still, which is different from the photograms where I'm moving around quite a bit. It's a different energy, it's a different requirement, and the process also is very slow. So you won't really see the outlines of my body in the same way that you see in the photograms. It's not quite obvious that they are contact prints. And that has been like a really wonderful discovery through this process. The cyanotypes to me are an acceptance of beauty in this process of healing. They are very challenging to me because they're unwieldy. So they do not act the way that, they've never acted the way that I expected them to act. Cyanotypes, if anyone is familiar with that process, is usually touted as very simple and straightforward, but it really isn't. And there's a complexity to the process that has surprised me, that has affected how I work on these pieces, and has been this wonderful kind of feedback loop that happens throughout the work as well. So I often say that the work changes me, and then as I change, the work changes. And so it's this constant back and forth. I think this will be a good place to talk about the title as well. So Break With Me Foundation is loosely related to a series titles that I've given the the crocheted photograms, and one of those is actually on this middle wall here with the hands, and there's a crocheted into the paper here. So yeah, it's that one piece. There are a couple more in the back, and that series title actually is Bear With Me Foundation, B-A-R-E, not B-E-A-R, B-A-R-E. So it implies to me vulnerability and openness. When I crochet into this paper, I also am very instinctual and improvisational. Crochet is throughout this exhibition, and it's in my practice because it's something that I do in my everyday life to calm down, to get through a subway ride, or sometimes when I'm just watching television. It also is a process I inherited from a family member who is extremely important to me and very helpful in my healing process. And so I try to be as improvisational and as instinctual as possible as I make those pieces. But Bear With Me was sort of an ask to this whole situation that's happening, to hold on to me. It was an ask for the foundation that I kind of am building to hold me and to be patient with me, but also to be vulnerable with me. So I'm kind of using the cognate. So it's better, it works if you just say it, not read it, because I'm asking for both spellings of the word bear, B-E-A-R-E-A-R-E. And then Break With Me is a call to where I am right now. It's also a call to the work that's all in the back. I have a series of what I'm calling cracked silver gelatin photograms, where I'm taking the paper, before I use it, I go to town on it. So I'm using the paper to exchange a lot of distress, a lot of anger, a lot of rage, a lot of sadness. And what's great is that fiber paper takes a lot. It can take a lot. And so I take that cracked substrate and I'm making my photograms. Most of them are self-portraits using that substrate. But the break with me, and as Katrina said, is it is a communion. It is also conjuring this this split, but it also is, I would say, rife with the meaning around what it means to heal. So healing is not a linear experience. It's something that I've come to realize is very cyclical. If anyone has even dealt with grief or loss of someone, there always is this looking back. And I'm acknowledging in Break With Me Foundation that I'm at a point where I'm a different person looking back at all of this work. I'm a different person looking back at where I've come from. I'm a different person looking at my family. And I also have come through and have done a lot of work, a lot of repair to create, I guess, a foundation in a sense. But also to realize that healing doesn't necessarily mean that you will feel better. Healing means that you are healthier and able to feel. I'll say for me, I won't say it, I don't want to make a general statement, but for me, what it's meant is that I'm healthy enough to open up and to relate, to feel in ways that I was not allowed to feel in ways that used to conjure threats, and I'm able to feel in a way that says more about who I am, and also allows me to connect with others in a way that I wasn't able to before I started this work. And yeah, that's essentially that. I want to know if anyone has any questions, or if anyone, if anyone has any questions. Any questions? So if you have no questions, I will go on a little bit more to talk about the sound. So I mentioned at the very beginning that the sound is the early parts of this work, and sound is extremely important in how I take care of myself in my daily life. There are certain songs I listen to over and over again, and I started making sound pieces again at a time when I didn't want to make photographs, and but needed and also needed something to kind of take care of myself. So I'm someone who has anxiety, and sometimes it's hard to just leave the apartment. I live in New York City, and so when I started making these, it was just really difficult. So I paid attention to songs that I needed to listen to leave the house, and decided I do have a music background. Like, okay, you can make music, so let's pay attention to what it is that you like about this and how it affects you, and let's make music. So what you hear in these rooms are a series of what I call hums. And to make the hums, I layer my voice on top of each other in a cappella, usually around a chord that I love or a note that I'm obsessed with, and that happens. So this room is F sharp major, and F sharp major comes from a lot of gospel songs that I love. They all happen to be in F sharp major. That's something I paid attention to. The middle room is C major, and that comes from an obsession that I still have with Beethoven and Anton Bruckner. So two composers that I really love and whose music, is a part of my Sanity playlist. And then in the back is actually kind of like a break of how I usually make my hums. And it's a cover song called I Don't Know. And it's by Perry and Carey. I don't don't know if anyone knows these people, but they're a British duo, and I discovered them and became obsessed with their songs. And the chords that they open with are so beautiful, and so I decided to break with how I usually make my hums. And so it's not an acapella. It's in acapella, but it's not just a hum. The end of that ends with sort of like a hum, but I wanted to make a cover of that song because the lyrics also had a lot to do with where I am essentially in my process. And to talk about the rules of my hums. These hums in these rooms are all made with tones that I make with one full exhalation. Again, that's another rule that I put on myself to make sure that when I'm making work that it stays therapeutic and meditative and doesn't drive me nuts with the creative process. And so breathing is emphasized there, where it's one full tone, and I decide where I move next in the chords. Choose F sharp major, we start with F sharp major, but we meet my voices. I decide how to rotate around it based off of what I want to hear next. I listen to these songs in my daily life, especially C major in the middle. I listen to it all the time. It also helps me to grieve. So I'm someone, sometimes I have a lot of emotion in my body and I'm not quite sure how to identify it. It just sits there, and these hums really help bring that out. If it's in the form of talking or crying or even just being able to intellectually identify it, they're helpful. And this work all kind of encapsulates this ongoing conversation that I'm having with myself. And in terms of this installation, this is where I get to express it, and a challenge to how to place it. And it also is based off of what it is I want to see, and what it is that I want to hear, and what it is I need. So yeah. So what I'm going to do actually is I want to share one of the songs that I am singing all the time right now in order to maintain my sanity. And I'm aware of the time. Like how much time? It's 4:04. Okay, all right. So I'm going to explain what the song is. So usually when I do a performance piece, it's around a blanket that I've made. So along with these pieces, I make blankets that are widths of songs where I crochet while I'm making the foundation chain for that blanket. This song, I'm not sure if I'm going to make a blanket out of it yet. But the reason why I want to share it is because it is a song that I'm just kind of learning about treatment and self-care, especially in trauma responses, that there are certain tones and vibrations and especially hums that are very soothing to the central nervous system. So I'm giving kind of like a scientific and almost intellectual explanation about this. But there is an emotional component as well. So the song is called Alone Time, which is kind of ironic because you guys are all here, but it's Alone Time by Rufus Wainwright. And I love Rufus Wainwright, and I'm learning about this this theory around care and trauma responses, and it's helping to explain to me why I'm so drawn to Rufus Wainwright songs. So if anyone is familiar with Rufus Wainwright, he's got a lot of tones, a lot of rich chords in his work, but he's also a large person, kind of tall, he's got big lungs, and a lot of his songs are just one long exhale. And so it's very reminiscent of my process of making hums. And so it's kind of aligns in terms of how he works, and I'm taking on kind of that process at the same time. But all right, so in the words of so bear with me. I need a little alone time, a little dream time. But don't worry, I will be back, baby. I need a little begone time, a little of my own time. But don't worry, I will be back, baby, to get you on the mists of Avalon, to save you from the cliffs of lovers leaping on and on and off and on and off and on. I need a little alone time, a little dream time. But don't worry, I will be back, baby, to get you on the wings of a perfect storm, to save you from the stings of having to turn off and on and off and on and off and on. I need a little alone time, a little dream time. But don't worry, I will be back, baby. I need a little bit gone time, a little of my own time. But don't worry, I will be back, baby, to get get you to get you to get you. It's not because you're here, but I'm feeling tingly in my hands. But that's something that usually happens when I sing this song. It has a lot to do with the low register of the voice and the rumble it makes. How it feels to sing this song is extremely comforting. But it's also a plea. I believe the song is him talking to either his partner or his child, being like, I just need to get away. It's a very introverted song. It's like, I need to get away, but I'm not abandoning you. I'm gonna come back, but this is what I need to do, and so I will return. It also is kind of reminiscent and to me resonating with how I conceived the show. That it is a return, it is a coming back. Even thinking about what I mentioned before about this foundation, rethinking my past, going from a lot of acute pain to going through the healing process and being healed enough to reflect and to come back and think through. So I'll end there. I could go on all day, but I won't. But thank you so much for being here and for taking time to listen to the concept behind the show. If you have any questions, please ask me. I'm open to talking and speaking, even if you have questions about the processes themselves. But I really appreciate your time and thank you.